Hello, my research was on auditory processing disorder, and I'm Taylor Doyle. Some characteristics for behaviors: they can have problems following directions and distracted by background noises. They have oral and written expression problems and problems attending to oral messages. For developmental signs, which we'll go deeper into on my next slide, in preschool, they'll typically speak later than most children. In grades K through 4, they'll be slow to learn connection between letters and sounds. Grades 5 through 8, they will reverse letter sequences. And in high school, they will avoid reading and writing tasks. So for preschool, just a little bit more in depth of what it'll look like for teachers or parents. They'll have pronunciation problems. They will have slow vocabulary growth. They'll have difficulty rhyming words, and they'll be restless and easily distracted. They'll have trouble interacting with peers and have issues following directions or routines, and their fine motor skills will be slow to develop. When they get through K through 4th grade, you can notice APD through them confusing basic words. They'll make consistent reading and spelling errors. They'll be slow to remember facts, and they'll be impulsive, and they will have a difficult time planning. I thought this was really interesting. They'll have an unstable pencil grip, which comes up throughout from this grade forward. Their handwriting will have issues, and their pencil grip will become more and more complicated. They'll have trouble learning about time, and again, there will be poor coordination, and they'll be unaware of physical surroundings. For grades 5th through 8th, they'll begin to reverse letter sequences, so as I've provided, they can confuse soiled with solid and left with felt. They are slow to learn prefixes, suffixes, and root words. They'll avoid reading aloud, probably in result to difficulty with, as the first bullet point says, they'll reverse letter sequences, and that's probably why they avoid reading out loud in a public setting. They have trouble with word problems. As I mentioned before, they have difficulty with handwriting. They avoid writing assignments, slow or poor recall of facts, and difficulty making friends, which difficulty making friends also, unfortunately, is a common symptom through, I would believe, kindergarten forward. In high school, they'll continue to spell incorrectly. They'll have trouble summarizing and have trouble answering open-ended test questions. They'll have weak memory skills, difficulty adjusting to new settings. They'll work slowly and have a poor grasp of abstract concepts. They'll either pay too little attention to detail or focuses on them too much, so on both levels of extreme, and they'll misread information. Some history I learned through this research process dates back to the 1950s, and a primary psychologist by the name of Helmer Michaelbust from Northwestern University was a pioneer in assessing APD and doing a lot of the research for it. Another researcher who learned underneath Michaelbust was his teacher, led a clinic where they observed children and took notes of their disabilities to better recognize APD. Even back then in the 50s, the parents recognized that their children were being distracted by noises in the background when they were trying to learn, and they were having poor grades in their classes. So they began to notice that things were wrong based off of these symptoms that we use to recognize APD today. In my research, it mentioned that the methods of assessment were relatively limited, and even today there's a debate about whether APD actually exists in some even argue that there's no consistent way to evaluate or treat it, and some even said that it doesn't actually exist. But we, as teachers, educators, and parents, believe it is true and are trying our best to better assist our young adults and children in their journey with APD. Prevalence, so the statistics I learned. 5% of school-age children have some type of APD. Approximately 50% of children with dyslexia also have coexisting APD. It occurs in 10 to 20% of adults and has a 2-to-1 ratio between boys and girls. Although the exact cause remains unclear, it does not appear to be caused by peripheral hearing impairment. I found some pretty interesting teacher bibliographies. This one was found with the Child Mind Institute. I mentioned that it's useful because it has a specific folder, but like section for educators to learn about APD from a teaching perspective, and also how to teach APD students or special needs students. It has a report on the teen brain, which anyone can use for any teenager. It has classroom strategies, learning and behavior issues, teacher guides, and webinars and school talks. And so not only does it provide different strategies, but it also has webinars where you can kind of have your own little personal teaching video of other people speaking to you about this specific case and how to understand it and treat it and better help students that are suffering from it. My second bibliography, it also provides techniques, but it was a bit more specific. It mentioned putting the student with APD or some sort of special need closer to the teacher and farther away from the exit door. It mentioned how to speak to them. It mentioned providing images to teach, like pictures for them to better understand the concept of what you're trying to teach them. For the parent bibliography, it was also from Child Mind Institute. It was useful because it covers behavior, discipline, divorce, how to handle taking your child on holiday and vacations, and other things, much like everyday life with your child. It expresses common concerns, parent guides, and workshops, and even provided an option to ask an expert. What I mostly took away from this specific website was it was just really trying to help parents in this difficult journey, and it felt like a community when I was reading through this. It felt like there was definitely a supportive community for parents, specifically with children that have APD. My second bibliography, it was 7 things I wish people knew about parenting a child with APD. And so it was written by a parent who has a child with this disorder, and it was interesting to read about it from the parent's perspective. They expressed what they have learned through this process. They provided useful tips that they found that worked. They provided things to avoid when trying to parent your child with APD, and it just seemed really useful for these students that these parents that may be struggling with their child and trying to give them the best childhood and equip them for their futures. Thank you.